So thank you. All the little beeps and chimes in the ear. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today and coming to the presentation called Decolonizing the Binary Within Birthing. Within the title, there are many loaded words. So first, we're going to kind of go through the concepts of decolonization, the binary, and within Two-Spirit Health, and go through some Two-Spirit Health pieces. But I'll explain the agenda a little bit more in a few slides. But I just wanted to start off by letting folks reflect on a point that not only women have babies, and thus we must work towards a birthing environment where all folks who are bringing new life into this world feel supported. And this is a concept and an understanding that the world is ever changing, and we need to ensure that our healthcare practices or our practices, wherever the folks who are joining are from, are adapting and supporting the environment as we continue to grow and change and become a world where love and kindness, which I always say and people always laugh about, but love and kindness is the key to everything. And as a nurse, I truly believe that. So moving forward, I will also like to do my own land acknowledgement. So thank you, Nicole, but I would also like to acknowledge the land of which I work, play, and learn is gathered on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Siamo, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So to me, land acknowledgement is a really important piece to include in my presentation, because it gives me a moment to really reflect on where I am, where I come from, and the point of being here today. So especially during a time of knowledge sharing or a session where we're learning, the responsibility that comes with that. So everybody on this call has responsibility to ask questions, to learn, and to continue to grow and change our own practices as we move forward. So a land acknowledgement really helps us pay tribute to the literally millions of folks who lost their lives to get us to where we are to get us to where we are today, and how we can pay tribute to those folks who lost their lives as we continue to move forward within healthcare and within our practice. So the agenda for today, acknowledgement, who am I? I'll speak quickly. I'll add a little bit to what Nikki said, but that was pretty much the whole thing. We're going to talk about the concept of decolonization, the concept of the binary, the concept of two-spirit roles, two-spirit terms, and then we're going to try and connect them all together. I also will quickly speak to some findings that I recently have completed my Master's of Nursing, and just speak to one of the main findings in that, so that we can really reflect on the difference between the word to and with, and then an open conversation and question. So when I present or when I have discussions like this, I really like to focus more on a roundtable discussion. So if folks have questions throughout, I'm really happy for you to ask for clarification throughout the presentation, especially if it's relevant to the concept, or if I spoke really fast, which I tend to do, or anything about that. I'm happy for folks to ask questions throughout the discussion. I want to reiterate that this is a safe space for questions. I know that it can be difficult for us to verbalize some things. Saying that, I will ensure that when the questions are coming out, if we are, I think the best explanation is giving examples. Say somebody speaks about a situation, ensuring that it is safe for everybody who's listening. So if they're speaking and utilizing terms that are discriminatory, then I will be asking you to having a side discussion with me instead of a conversation where we're putting other people who may be listening at risk. So just really setting that foundation of asking questions is absolutely appropriate, but ensuring when we're asking questions that they're coming from a place of kindness, as well as not ensuring that we're not using terms or language that would be harmful for folks listening. So who am I? As Nikki said, I'm very proudly Two-Spirit Métis. My parents are originally from Treaty 1 and Treaty 2 territory, which we now know as Winnipeg and St. Rose, but I was born and raised as an uninvited guest on Coast Salish territory all throughout the Fraser Valley. I am the son of a very powerful woman who raised 3 children, and the grandson, or great nephew, but I call her my grandmother, to my Aunt Alma, who was also a very strong woman, and a brother to my sister Bailey, who is also a very strong woman. So my entire life is around and has been supported by strong women who I was a part of through different pregnancies and different supports, which really led me to my path within sexual health and within perinatal and neonatal health. So I graduated from Thompson Rivers University in 2015. Very proudly, and went right into the NICU, so neonatal intensive care and postpartum within Kamloops. Worked there for a couple years, really started to see the gaps, especially for young Indigenous moms or young Indigenous parents, where they had some issues with lack of access to resources, not because they didn't want them, which the system continuously tries to paint, but the issue was service delivery. So that really led me down a path of looking into different ways that services could be provided, and what are these major gaps that our system is following through or causing. Led me to work within First Nations Health 30 for a little bit, and then do my sexual health specialty, and then back to Vancouver, where I've been working in a queer sexual health clinic and within a NICU for the last couple of years. And then from that, I was doing a lot of Two-Spirit and queer Indigenous health research and work on the side, which led me to connect with CBRC, which is the Community-Based Research Center. So it's a non-for-profit queer research organization where I currently work as the Two-Spirit program manager. Within that role, I manage and support a number of Two-Spirit staff members and work with and for the Two-Spirit community as a whole throughout the province. And a big part of that is an at-home testing pilot. So again, speaking to my previous experience, looking at different ways that we can address service delivery on the system side. So if we can get kits or testing services to folks' homes, what does that look like? So we're currently in the process of launching a pilot where folks will be able to access testing services from their own home, in the comfort of their own home, with direct connections to care, not a phone line that puts them through a number of different bumps and jumps in order for them to connect with somebody. Yeah, and I've been on the path. So as I said, I'm Métis. I've been on the path of reclaiming my ancestry for, I don't even know how long now, for my entire life. I was raised always knowing I was Métis, but I never really understood what that meant until my early teenage years. And I was finally able to connect with a few different Métis elders. And then actually in 2011, when I first moved to Kamloops, I connected with some Métis elders in Merritt, BC, and had a really good conversation with an elder, Carol, who, it was the first time I heard about Two-Spirit people. And as she was sitting there discussing Two-Spirit people and what it meant to her family and the responsibilities of Two-Spirit people, it was the first time I truly felt and experienced how healing culture can be. How listening to something that I didn't even know about before took a weight off my shoulders and allowed me to connect to something that was more than just me. And that historically, there's always internal conflict, but historically, overall, as a Two-Spirit person or somebody within that realm, we were accepted and a part of community and actually had responsibility in community. So listening to that and hearing that helped challenge a lot of my own internal struggles and made me realize my responsibility after figuring that out, and how I can support and spread the Two-Spirit love and sprinkle Two-Spirit health and Two-Spirit folks throughout everything that I can do. So we'll get into Two-Spirit health a little bit more in a few minutes, but first, we're going to talk about the concept of decolonization. So what do we mean when we say decolonization? So decolonization is about shifting the way Indigenous peoples view themselves and the way non-Indigenous people view Indigenous people. So this is what it means to me. So it's really shifting that view. Indigenous people are reclaiming the family, community, culture, language, history, and traditions that were taken away under federal government policies designed for assimilation. So decolonization restores the Indigenous worldview, it restores cultural and traditional ways, and it replaces Western interpretations of history with Indigenous perspectives of history. So that's what it means to me as an Indigenous person, as a Métis person. What does it mean within our healthcare system? A lot of times we hear conversations about creating space. And to me, that's not decolonization. That's continuous colonization, because we're not creating space, we're giving the space back that was taken. So really reflecting on the way that we say things, or creating or giving, it's all about giving back the space that was taken. And the big thing is increasing visibility. Now more than ever, we understand that you can't simply just put art or images on a wall in a healthcare facility. That doesn't make it safe. That doesn't decolonize the practices that we work with in Western medicine. So it's really understanding and leaning into visibility and what that means, and the purposeful visibility that we're having within our settings. It's not just simply having, again, art on a wall or a dream catcher, which unfortunately still happens today. And then we have a long way to go. As a registered nurse who practices as a registered nurse and really believes in science and in medicine, we really have a long way to go to continue to maneuver through the two-eyed seeing approach, where we're weaving together traditional medicines as well as Western medicine. So as the In Plain Sight report validated for many, we have a long way to go that includes a true understanding of decolonization and ways of which our healthcare system within BC can give back the space for Indigenous people to return to healthcare and bring our own teachings and values. So really giving back that space for Indigenous folks to be able to bring in traditional birthing concepts, bring in traditional ways of birthing, traditional medicines in birthing, and how we as healthcare providers or the number of folks, I know that not everybody's a healthcare provider on the call, but whatever professional practice that you're involved in birthing, how can we support folks throughout their birthing process to ensure that they can include whatever traditional ways or traditional medicines that they would like in their birthing. And then next, we have the concept of the binary. This is a term that is very commonly used nowadays. So the binary, simply as per the Webster Dictionary, a binary is consisting of indicating or involving two. So just two things, one or the other. In current society, the binary centers around all human beings as being either a man or a woman. And I think these terms are which are the most important. Sex versus gender. So for a long time, we've used male and man interchangeably and female and woman interchangeably. But now we definitely realized that that's not the case. A male does not mean that they're a man if they have a sex that is identified at birth through the XX or the XY chromosomes, because sex is very different than gender. So as I said in the opening, not only women have babies is because not only folks who identify as women have children today, or since the dawn of time, to be totally honest. So really understanding the difference between using male and female identifiers and using man or woman gender identifiers. There's a huge, huge difference. Western constructs say that sorry, my typing is off there. We know that throughout Turtle Island and the entire world, there are many, many communities with many genders and many gender expressions. The binary was created purposely to divide and disempower folks who do not fit within the societal mold of man or woman. And I guarantee majority of the folks have experienced this within their life or experienced it on the news. These are concepts that we've been talking about a lot more common, and just really trying to grow and push ourselves to challenge the Western notions of the binary and what that looks like for folks. And then especially within birthing. So I had a conversation with the folks before everybody jumped on, and it's like, what does that mean within birthing, especially when women are the centered around birthing? And that's not to say that that shouldn't be the case. It's about giving back space to other folks who also identify, and what do those pathways look like for people who are also giving birth who may not identify within the spectrum of being a woman. So it's not taking away, erasing, or removing. It's how are we giving back some other space to other folks who identify within the non-binary spectrum, or within the two-spirit spectrum, or within all these other spectrums that we can uphold and create space for. And I think the biggest piece about this, and it's, again, not our fault, but it's challenging the internal and systemic binaries that we have within ourselves that society has taught us our entire lives. So my biggest thing is, it's not necessarily your fault that we practice within this binary system, but it is our responsibility now that we know people are being harmed by it. People are having detrimental and lifelong consequences because we force them within a system that doesn't allow them to exist as themselves. And I think that really speaks to the concept of being two-spirit, as well as there's a number of other folks throughout the world that have similar concepts. And I'll speak to that in a moment when I get into two-spirit folks. So the next topic the next concept is going to be specifically about two-spirit folks, and going into a little bit of history and some health. But I would love if anybody has any questions thus far about the binary or the concept of decolonization and what that looks like to me, or to anybody else. I would love to if anybody has anything they would like to say, you can unmute yourself. If not, I can jump into the concept of two-spirit.
Hi, it's Lucy here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi, Lucy.
Hi, how are you? My question, and maybe it's more of a comment, is it's sad that we even have to title being two-spirit, being he, she, or him, her. And, you know, I'm quite saddened that society has us today having to title who we are as individuals, where in the past we used to just accept everyone and look at everyone for the gifts that they came with and provided for within the community. That's my thought for today. Thanks.
Thank you, Lucy. And I completely agree. And I think as society, and then we look into healthcare and look at the spectrums, and like healthcare to even the worst degree is like you have to conform to a box to access services. And it's so upsetting continuously to see that, like, oh, sorry, a perfect example is the sexual health clinic that I work at. You have to identify technically as a man to get primary care. I'm like, what kind of system do we have where we're forcing people to conform or forcing people into these boxes to access services? So our healthcare service continues to perpetuate this binary and this forced binary on people. And it's, how do we challenge that? We don't want boxes. We don't want people to fix. We want this beautiful gray area where services are accessible, and then we can have these different channels depending on what folks need. I think we're unfortunately far from that. But I completely agree that the labels and the over labeling has also been a huge issue for a lot of folks, and having to define themselves to access care, which I think is very dangerous, because if we have to define ourselves, then our system unfortunately holds us to that definition and doesn't allow us to be as fluid or change, which is what we're supposed to be. And we're supposed to be able to walk through and move through different places. So it's really leaning into that ability that, like, we shouldn't have to conform or define ourselves to access services, because as we've seen, once we provide a definition, we're held into that definition, even if I grow out of it, or even if I change, or even if I expand, or whatever happens throughout my growth or my concepts of identity. So thank you, Lucy.
Nicole here.
Hi.
Hi, just on that topic, like I work in a prenatal clinic, and in order to access something we use called an antenatal record, the gender has to be set as female, which is actually like we've come into like a situation where we are like to certain clients, like, hey, are you okay if we change this so we can access this record? And we have people on our team who like kind of put a request into the system, the particular system that had it set as it had to be it had to be a female client in order to do it, and they were like, oh, there's nothing we can do about it. Like, it wasn't just a tech issue that was easy fixed, it was a whole system thing. And then another thought I have while we're on this topic is I don't like referring people to BC Women's Hospital is also another thing that I've encountered where I'm like, oh, I wonder if we'll change the name of that. I know it used to be Grace Hospital. Is there room in the next 5 to, I don't know how long it would take, but is that something we want to talk about on a bigger picture of, like, hey, an entire hospital where a lot of people who may be referred to don't identify as a woman, and what limitations or what harm that causes too.
Thank you, Nicole. I think your first comment is a perfect example of our system and how we continuously are forcing people to either go back to something that they have left behind. We see it in names and dead names, or in names that folks don't use anymore, in gender identifiers or sex identifiers. We continuously force people, and it's like, it's always so perplexing to me when folks are like, oh, there's nothing we can do about it. I'm like, what? How can we not change or adapt a system like this? And it's just this continuous struggle. And I think as we move forward, the pressure's on, right? Like, we know from even these discussions we're having now, but the pressure's on our system. And if it doesn't start to get moving a little bit faster, then it's going to be blowing up even more in the system situations. Because folks won't tolerate it, and folks aren't tolerating it. And we see that with some eruptions within different accesses to services and conversations that are happening. And I think funny that you said that right before the call. I spoke to that situation about BC Women's and folks who access BC Women's. And I think the community within the Two-Spirit, queer, and trans community will be for folks who identify whether that is something that needs to happen, or what other options we have about creating that, or giving back that space. And I think that's the thing, is like, in my intent in these conversations is not to disservice or remove women from that conversation. My entire in the slightest or dishonor women or the women that have fought endlessly for where we are today in society. And it's how do we ensure that that name is inclusive in other ways? So what else can we do to it? So I think it will be conversations that we have as we move forward.
I really like that. The what else can we do to it? Yeah, fantastic.
Because
thank you.
As somebody who like within the spectrum of a man, I wouldn't. Yeah, it's an interesting concept and an interesting conversation to have about naming and what to have. Thank you. Okay, any other folks want to jump in, and then I'll speak to the concept of two-spirit. So the concept of two-spirit. Two-spirit is a term that is being used a lot more commonly. And I think I want to quickly chat about the concept and what it looks like in current research and the hopes moving forward. You may notice how this concept is becoming more and more common, but sadly, I must report that it is typically utilized incorrectly or marked up as a singular characteristic rather than the complex and multifaceted concept of what it is. So for so long, two-spirit folks were forced to pick between being queer or indigenous. And we've really seen that historically when queer or two-spirit indigenous folk moved to the big city and moved to bigger cities. So Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, bigger cities, where there was more of a queer community because they experienced discrimination in their own community back home, but then they experienced racism within the community, within the queer community in major cities. So a lot of folks were having to pick between their indigeneity or their queer identity, and there was no place for both. And it was through a lot of work and a lot of reconnecting to historical teachings where the concept of two-spirit kind of came to be and the understanding of what it means. So two-spirit is a community organizing tool and not necessarily an identity. And what that means is that it includes many things. It's not just two-spirit, it is a many things. So I am two-spirit, I am Métis, I am gay, I identify as a man. So these are all the things that are included in that. And two-spirit doesn't sub it, two-spirit isn't, it's all those pieces make me two-spirit, or in my expression are two-spirit. And to me and to my best friend, Leah, who's also two-spirit, our relationship, our connection to the concept is very different. And that's the beauty of it. It really pushes back against the boxes and the structures that we have in place because it's very ambiguous and it's very powerful. So it is different if it is difficult to make sense of the concept outside of an Indigenous framework. And I'll get into that a little bit more. Two-spirit is a traditional circumstance in a traditional circumstance was more of a gender analysis, not a sexual orientation, which it is continuously used as in current research, in current data collection, in current forms that we're filling out. In the hospital, for example, it's either bumped up to just a sexual orientation or just a gender, which they are not disconnected. They're very strongly connected. So by having to split your choices, we're actually doing a disservice to the understanding of the overall concept of being two-spirit. And as I said, it's not just one thing, but it's all-encompassing. And it's, as I said, very dependent on the person. Today, most people do associate two-spirit with LGBTQAI+, but as I said, it's not just specifically related to sexual orientation. So just because someone is two-spirit does not automatically mean that they identify within the LGBTQ spectrum. It doesn't automatically mean that they are gay. So just because someone identifies as Indigenous and gay does not mean that they are two-spirit. It's more than just a label. It's a concept that folks are connected to and connected more for. So as I said earlier, current data collection of gender or sexual orientation, it really divides the concept of being two-spirit and what that means. So historically, two-spirit. So up until CC or Christopher Columbus came on over and shoved a flag into the ground on Turtle Island and claimed that he saved Indigenous folks across Turtle Island, we had our own terms. And I can actually get to share some of those terms with you today. And then around 1492, when colonization started, and up until the early 90s, the term Berdache was used for two-spirit folks, which again is a very harmful, very problematic term. It's extremely homophobic and discriminatory, and that was the term. Even if you look back in some older research that was used in our data collection, in the translation, it's a French word, but there is a number of different words within the world, but it's super problematic. So you can look at it after if you would like. And then from that, in the 90s, a number of Two-Spirit elders and knowledge keepers came together at a gathering in Winnipeg, and that's where the term or the concept of being Two-Spirit was coined. So the difference between a kind of a concept, as I was explaining in the slide before, is that it's multifaceted and includes number of things. And this Two-Spirit concept is actually new. It's from the 90s, and it's a placeholder for the terms that were taken away, that we're in the process of reclaiming. And once we are able to reclaim some of these terms and use these terms from our own communities, that's when we can get to understanding the identity of being Two-Spirit and the roles of being Two-Spirit in community. So historically, we've been able to find and collect a number of different things of the roles of being Two-Spirit community. So mediators, love potions or matchmakers, social workers, name giving, Sundance holders, holy people, peacemakers, joined war parties, were doctors or medicine people. And it was such an important piece for us, for the understanding when I first heard about being Two-Spirit, and what it meant was that responsibility in community and the honor that it was to have a Two-Spirit person in community, and that connection to something more than you, and that ability to walk in many realms and in many spaces. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of the terms. So before I move forward, the terms are translated into English, and I think we all maybe have an understanding, but realize that English is a very limited language, and some of these terms, and it's unfortunate, and as we experienced, it doesn't provide the context for understanding. We have a very cold and limited language. So some of these translations are super problematic because we don't have the terms that are necessary to fully capture the connotation or the understanding of what it means. So see, some of these are words throughout Turtle Island, so all over North America, different terms that are used for folks who identify within the realm of Two-Spirit, but these are the specific terms, and these are the identities in a sense. So this is the endpoint. Two-Spirit is kind of the concept placeholder, where the identity or the term is here for folks within these specific communities or within their specific communities. So we have a number of different terms that we've been able to collect. I think we're at 172 different terms, which is great. But I mean, we have 179 languages in BC alone. So I mean, we still have a long way to go to continue to take back and find words. And unfortunately, in some communities, the words are lost. And we have created or are working to create new words to capture the essence and the context that is so important within the Two-Spirit concept. Oh, I missed a slide. So there was another page, sorry, and it was from this, that include the Sioux people from within Ontario, and the term translated loosely to coward. And I really wanted to highlight that. So that's so funny that that's the only page that I forgot to include in here, so I'm sorry. But the term translated loosely to coward. And when we were having a meeting with a number of folks from the Sioux Nation, that they explained that the word actually translated to they who don't fight. And the understanding was that Two-Spirit folks in that community didn't go to war, but they were the ones who decided whether we go to war. They were the mediators and had huge responsibility. And it was so interesting to see that we took that word and then translated all the way down to coward, where actually that word is like one of the most powerful terms in community, because they were the war chiefs. They were the folks who really decided or understood or really worked with other folks to decide whether they were going to war or not. And then it was translated to English, like those who don't fight, because that's whoever was translating it. And then that was translated to coward. So it really brings you perspective to folks where, like, how we lost so much connotation and context when we're translating Indigenous languages to English. And it's also important to be aware that other cultures outside of North America have other genders and other identities and other concepts similar to Two-Spirit. Two-Spirit is a specific North American term for Indigenous people only. I've heard other non-Indigenous folks use it because they feel they relate to the term or the concept, but that's not appropriate. It is a Two-Spirit, an Indigenous specific term in North America. But a number of other nations throughout the world actually do have multiple third genders, fourth genders, or concepts that are similar to Two-Spirit. So this is just a list that we've actually been able to add 7 or 8 different countries to the list that I need to add in here. So it's super beautiful and eye-opening that a lot of these places throughout the world have multiple genders. And again, colonization and Western civilization has eradicated and erased folks as a move of power to silence people and fit them into these specific categories that don't allow them to explore and expand. Because I mean, imagine we were in a society that taught us to be who we really are and how powerful we will all be, right? If we didn't have these insecurities about the way we looked, or the insecurities about if we're too masculine or too feminine and all these things, we would be powerful. And I know it sounds like a conspiracy, but that's not what the system wants. It wants us to be a little bit struggling and not connecting that deep. So that's why this is so important for us to really dive into ourselves. And like, if there's anything that comes from the conversation today, is just self-reflection and exploring some of our own internal binaries or assumptions that we make about people. So who were some of the Two-Spirit people from the ages? So these are some Two-Spirit images that we've been able to collect, and actually a museum in Manitoba is currently doing a huge review of Two-Spirit images. And these are just a number of Two-Spirit folks from all across Turtle Island. And actually the ones in the bottom left are the only Canadian images, or the images from around here that we have. Majority of the images we have, like literally only like 25, not even of folks. And some of them don't even have identifiers. So it's very difficult for us to reclaim or to claim a full Two-Spirit history. So it's a continuous process. I can open it up again if anybody has any questions or thoughts about anything that I can clarify. No? Okay. So the next slide will be a slide about residential schools. So I just want to pre-context that for folks who are listening and who are watching the next slide, and we will I will explain to you why it is so important that we bring residential schools up in all presentations, as well as especially relating it to Two-Spirit people. So this is the first Indian residential school that was created in Pennsylvania. So there was Indian residential schools all over North America. And first, I would like to just place a moment for us all just to connect and just put our head down or put our head up, wherever you would like, just to really provide a moment and a space for the children that we have found and the ones that we still haven't. Thank you, everyone. And I think it's really important to understand why this picture is so important when we're talking about the binary. Is what does this have to do with Two-Spirit people? Everything and nothing. It has nothing to do with Two-Spirit people, because as you can see, there's a very clear binary that was forced upon Indigenous children in the residential school system. It was a very clear separation of folks who identified within different spectrums. So as you can see, the boys are in the back and the girls are in the front, and there's no space and there's no ability for folks to be who they are within the non-binary or the Two-Spirit spectrum. So what does it have to do with Two-Spirit people? Nothing, because we were erased, and everything, because we were erased, because that piece was also taken away in Indian residential schools. And that understanding that discrimination and homophobia are still very alive and well in Indigenous communities, even remote Indigenous communities, because that is also a legacy of the Indian residential school system, is that discrimination towards each other and towards folks who don't fit within the boxes or the spectrums that society deems or tells us is appropriate. Just give everybody a quick breather. That is a very heavy slide and a very eye-opening realization when we really realize the depth and the role that residential schools had in every facet of somebody's life and every piece, including towards the Two-Spirit and queer, trans, Indigenous community. So what is being done today to give back the space to Two-Spirit people, to folks who don't identify within the binary, to ensure that we are giving back the space for folks in this exact situation where we're talking about birthing? What is being done today? There's a number of Two-Spirit and different gatherings going on throughout the world, throughout North America, but even Indigenous gatherings that are happening in the UK, and of folks who are from North America who've moved are taking back the space and creating spaces where Two-Spirit, non-binary, and queer folk are welcome, and where we can create systems and structures to support each other when we have to navigate pathways that are very binary. So one of the most important things I speak to is visibility. So again, Nicole, Nikki, Miranda, having me here today, having this discussion, that's what's being done today. We're giving folks the space, like myself and whoever else can come and speak to some of these concepts, the space to have us all reflect, because a lot of us want to jump to the end. We want to jump to that system change and burn it all down, which like I fully support. But I also understand that we need to change in order for the whole system to change. So if everybody on this call does that internal reflection, really reevaluates and critically reflects on the forms that we use, or the language that we use, or the assumptions that we make within our work, then I think that pushes the system to change. So I forgot to change the slide a little bit, but connecting this to birthing. So current binary birthing standards, what are they? There aren't many. There are standards that we use, like I think Nicole said earlier, where we have to tick certain gender boxes or certain sex boxes. So there is no birthing standards that are inclusive of really other folks. There's no policies, there's no places. So we need to start looking at that and reflecting on our policies, and how can we have some standards that are non-binary or challenge it. And I don't know how many midwives are on the call, but to be totally honest, the Midwife Association is the only group of healthcare professionals that I've really seen try and tackle this and really take on putting out some non-binary recommendations and conversations about how to have these conversations with folks. Nursing, we haven't even touched it, and it's so unfortunate because of the number of nurses in this province. Physicians as well, I hope and dream. I know that there is a number of trans care physicians, so I think they're in their pockets, but again, the college and the association have a huge role in some of these standards and policy making. And how are we having conversations with other healthcare professionals about the difference between sex and gender, and ensuring that we're not using male and man or woman and female interchangeably, because there's a huge difference. Again, current terms being used. Most importantly, who are we working with and what? Is breast an appropriate term for some of the folks we're working with? Is vagina? So we have to have those conversations too, because some of those terms can be very harmful to folks, and they're not terms that we use or that they use. So we have to have some of these conversations with our patients. And we don't have to specifically ask, do you use the term vagina? But we can have conversations within the spectrum of what terms or what language are you comfortable with, and how can I best support you in your birthing experience? Because we know, I mean, for how long were we over touching some of our birthing patients and creating some awkward tensions, because folks have history of different types of abuse and history of different types of traumas. And we would go in to think that we were supportive, but we were actually causing more trauma and causing more pain. And I think it's so important for us to enter into these conversations. And don't get me wrong, I know that it can be scary, and I know that it can be hard, but it can be life-saving. It can completely depend if somebody has more children, if they would like to have more children in their life, if they have a traumatizing birthing experience where they don't feel supported. And I've heard it. BC, like a number of our hospitals where folks who don't identify within the spectrum of being a woman are giving birth, and people are using their names, and people are assuming that the man in the room or whoever the folk is in the room is their partner, and they're like assuming that they're married, or they're assuming all these things. And so it's happening today, and it's happening more than ever because folks are changing. And how are we ensuring that our system is changing to make sure that all birthing experiences are supported? And I think, again, having that conversation is important. Using our pronouns. So, I mean, I highly recommend everybody who are on Zoom. I was just having a conversation with Nikki because I don't know how to save he and him, so I always have to add it. But all of us should be having our pronouns in our names. All of us should use our pronouns when we introduce ourselves, so that we're setting the standard with whoever we're talking to, that we are aware that pronouns are important, that we shouldn't be assuming. And it's interesting when I have these conversations and seeing the folks who push back about pronoun usage, and it's typically cis, straight folks or other people who have never experienced any type of discrimination because of their sexual orientation or their gender expression or identity. So I strongly urge us all to add our pronouns, as well as to introduce ourselves with our pronouns. I think it's extremely important to set that stage. And we're seeing it in more emails and work conversations and things, but it's simple, but life-saving, truly. And again, it can determine whether somebody has more children or not, whether they want to bring more life into this world, whether they want to go back to your clinic or to the hospital, whether it's a safe space. So it's extremely important. Do not assume. This is, I mean, the saying, don't make, if you assume, it makes an ass out of you and me. It's a tall tale saying, but it is the most beautiful thing that I think we can use. Don't assume partners, don't assume sexual orientation, don't assume gender. We need to have these frank, beautiful conversations. Imagine we were able to start a conversation with somebody opening up and saying, hey, my name's Jessy Dame. I'm a registered nurse. I use he, him pronouns. What pronouns would you like to use? What does your care look like? What does your safety look like within this setting? And I know we have concepts and have some pieces or individuals do that in specific ways, but we need to create some type of understanding or policy or pathways. I don't like the word policy, but pathways for folks to use so that we can have an understanding that like we do have folks who are non-binary or within that spectrum, and what can we do as somebody who, as somebody taken out of this role, as somebody who is a busy nurse in a birthing unit or in a midwife clinic, what can they do, and what are these pathways and resources that they can connect to? And there are some out there, but they need to be more largely available to folks. And again, like I said, the Midwife Association put out a 2-pager that was great, I think last year or the year before, but it needs to stay updated, and we need to work towards that. And if anybody wants it, I can try and dig it up. But I think it's huge, again, just the assumption piece in having these conversations. And don't get me wrong, again, I don't want to put rose-colored glasses on. I don't have them on. I know time is an issue. And I truly believe that is a systemic point to ensure that, like, what can we do to create these relationships? And time is an issue. So having frank, open conversations with our patients is the best way to kind of navigate through that, because we don't have time to sit, unfortunately, and sit for hours with our patients as much as I dream I could. But I think that's where what I'm going to get into next, some of my master's finding, is the difference between connection to and with healthcare. Whew, big rant there, but I'm happy to, if anybody has any space or questions about the concept of two-spirit, of decolonization, of the binary, and then connecting it to birthing and trying to create that space within birthing. I don't know if anybody or even has an experience or a positive experience or another experience that they would like to speak about now. Isn't it anybody?
Jessy, it's Heather Cameron.
Hi, Heather.
Lovely job, lovely to see you. I just love what you said, you know, when we talk about over touching maybe our patients or our participants in labor and birthing. And I remember someone also pointing out to me, because I'm huge on conversations, that just because they say yes doesn't mean they mean yes. And I remember that being like, oh, right. And being able to follow up like, right, I have to also follow that body language, because I can be very hands-on birthing. And if someone says yes, but then they're wincing or pulling or whatever that looks like, and it just reminds me in so many conversations how we can be so quick to be like, oh, but I asked them and they said it was okay. And yet someone who grows up marginalized, oppressed, in an abusive relationship or as a child would be so used to saying yes to please other people, right? And that was a huge learning for me.
Thank you, Heather. And that's such a good point. And I think that is such an important point for us as providers to like, yes once doesn't mean yes always, right? So we have the right to take back a yes, especially in a setting like Heather's talking about, when we are programmed to say yes to healthcare providers. We're programmed and told that we should be doing whatever our healthcare provider says. So I think yes once does not mean yes always, as well as, again, reading that body language and trying to have some of those conversations, which, I mean, of course, if somebody walks through the emerge and they're in active labor, having a conversation with them about pronoun use is a very different situation. But I mean, it can like setting some of those tones or trying to figure out quick ways that we can, which it's not quick, don't get me wrong, but ways that we can have snippets saying, my name's Jessy, I use these pronouns, what pronouns do you like? Or if there is a partner in the room, how we can navigate that situation. Because of course, when somebody's in active labor or they're birthing, or we're outside and they're birthing, or depending on where we're interacting with folks throughout their pregnancy, sometimes it can be emergent, right? It can be a very fast situation. So we have to be adaptable as well. But thank you, Heather, exactly. And I think it is such an important, I mean, as we all know on this call, Western medicine has, I think in one of the most areas, has done a disservice to pregnancy. Like our long history of Western medicine and the trauma that we caused, and still today, the trauma that we continuously cause of folks who have babies, and the processes that we have in place. I truly need to validate that, and what I have seen as a healthcare professional and a nurse, and what I continuously hear, is we are continuously failing folks who bring children into this world, which is why these conversations need to happen more and more. And what can we do as advocates, as healthcare professionals, to change the system? Thank you, Heather. I don't know if anybody else has any other thoughts or feelings. So through this, a lot of my time, I speak about language and the importance of framing our community through questions, or the questions that we're asking. So historically, and for a long time, we've been using risk factored language. And what does that mean? Within current research, there tends to be a focus on risks that led to somebody somewhere, instead of protection that led to somebody to be somewhere. And for so long, especially within the binary or the non-binary, two-spirit, queer, and trans community, like me walking this earth, according to a lot of our textbooks, is a risk. My sexual orientation makes me a risk. My two-spirit identity makes me a risk. My Métis heritage makes me a risk. So as per a textbook, I should be living a very different life, as well as, if not dead, based on a lot of articles that I've read about folks who identify within my realm or within my concept. The first sentences talk about my death rates. And I think it's so important when we're framing our questions and our writing, if any folks are writers or putting out documents, what are we talking about? What are risk factors? Wouldn't you say the risk factor is the heterocentric society that we live in? Wouldn't you say the actual risk factor is that we are in a binary system? So why aren't those the risks? And then we talk about my concept of identity or my queerness as what protected me. Because I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for my own connection to those concepts, if it wasn't through the own power that I found. And you see it in articles that go out, or even quick updates that our colleges or associations put out. And it's like, what are these risk factors? And it's like, oof. Or when we're talking and a patient is admitted to the hospital or whatever, oh, what are their risk factors? And don't get me wrong, there are specific risk factors that can be scientifically and physiologically and anatomy focused. But then we get into other types of risk factors, again, like my concept of identity. And we have to speak to that and change that language, because me being gay does not make me a risk factor. Society is putting me at risk because of the societal view that I am abnormal or that I am not right. And we have to change that view, because the continuous risk factor language, especially of some of our moms who may use substances, or some of our parents who may use substances, look at the risk factor language and the continuous, I use it, demonization of folks in a system that has supported us to get here and has continuously marginalized or caused problems. And then they label us as vulnerable, or they label folks as vulnerable. And what shame and stigma does that add to it? So really having these conversations about risk factor language versus protective factor language. And that's what I really leaned into within my master's. So I really looked at the protective factors of queer and two-spirit men who've attempted suicide. Why are these folks still here? What are these protections? So within my research, I talked about protective factors was defined as anything that assists two-spirit and gay identified men who have attempted suicide to overcome or quell suicidal thoughts, plans, and or future attempts. So within my master's, again, it was protective factors. I found three major themes: routine and purpose, connection with healthcare, relationships and connection. And this theme, the second theme, is what I really want to talk to you about, but I'll quickly cover all of them. So though I looked at specifically suicidality within Two-Spirit and queer folks, these themes can absolutely transcend to all the communities, the vulnerable communities or the risk communities, these terms that we see every day, and can transcend. So theme one, what was considered a protection within this group of folks, was routine and purpose. So it emerged in many forms, but was consistently composed of keeping busy or occupied through physical, mental, or spiritual activities. So jogging, meditation, yoga, volunteering, working. This was seen as a distraction for some of these folks from suicidal ideation and what that looked like. Theme two, I think, was the most eye-opening finding for me, and was really, I mean, it wasn't as a nurse, but the difference between connecting with healthcare versus connecting to healthcare, to and with. You connect to something, but when you connect with something or someone, that's when that relationship is built. And that's when I felt seen, or when these folks felt seen, and they felt they were able to access healthcare and continuously access healthcare. So in birthing situations and settings, that connection with healthcare, having the conversations that I spoke to earlier, and being able to connect with your patients, not just to, we're not just connecting to somebody, we're not just ticking boxes and getting in and out. And I know, I'm sorry, folks, I know I'm saying patients and talking about healthcare settings a lot. And I know that some folks aren't within those settings, so please stay with me, but the connection with or to somebody or someone is the most important piece, connection with. So healthcare as opposed to connection to, found that the way healthcare providers interacted could be very protective for folks to develop protective measures where they would access healthcare again. So this again speaks to accessing birthing centers or accessing healthcare centers or accessing services again. If they're able to connect with their healthcare professional, with their doula or with their midwife, and that difference between just feeling like the transactional to relationship, which happens a lot. You know, when we're in the hospital, we're admitted, we're ticking all these boxes, we're answering all these questions. There's very little time or sometimes effort because our nurses are burnt out, our healthcare professionals are burnt out to connect with. And I don't have an exact answer with that. I think we see it in the news every day right now about the burnout and the harm that is happening to our healthcare professionals. But it's that understanding of how do we connect with versus to, and those creating those supportive environments and a consistency of care and compassion, which again, very difficult within our current system. We see a lot of folks in and out of care, or a lot of folks in and out of different areas. So it is very hard to have consistency, but what can we do to work towards creating consistency of care for folks who may not want to access care or who have horrible experiences accessing care because they connected to it before instead of with. And I truly believe that that one simple word is extremely important and was huge in these findings. And then the last theme was relationships and connectedness. So the first one was routine and purpose. So a connection or relationship with kind of a routine. And the second one was connection with healthcare. And then this third section was just relationship and connectedness overall, basically anything that didn't fit into those first categories. And it was beautiful to see how many folks connected with animals, and the relationship that they had and the dependency of their animals was so huge for folks. And I think creating space in our practice where animals can be involved, obviously in the hospital setting, it's not always the case, but I have beautifully seen it in different areas or within their own homes, how we've involved different pieces of nature, song, dance, and animals in care, and how healing somebody involving their own animals or their own pieces can be for folks. So I just like to mention that too, because I have 2 puppies, which I'm surprised they haven't bugged me, but I come home every day after a long, stressful day and connect with my dogs, and how healing that can be, and the innocence that animals bring into our lives. You know, like it is such a beautiful piece that a lot of folks can take for granted. So I really like to mention those strong relationships, especially for this group of folks, how animals are healing and how connected folks can feel to their animals. So just a quick summary of the findings within the masters. So it was building a relationship within and outside of oneself is a key protective factor for folks within this cohort. But again, it transcends beyond just the group of Two-Spirit and queer Indigenous folks that I was talking about who attempted suicide. It was really clear that outside of their suicidal ideation, these pieces stood, and through a number of other research articles and pieces that I've been involved in, it was clear that these findings are very common. The importance of connection with healthcare services, the need for Two-Spirit and gay men tailored services. So again, this is specific to Two-Spirit and queer identified men, but tailored services. I think for a long time, we were kind of taught that tailored services were harmful because they were separating or siloing. but we've come full circle with the understanding that actually tailored services are necessary. We need them to ensure that we're supporting folks. A general service does not actually cover all folks, and it only covers the most common or the societally accepted folks. So tailored services is really important. So we need these multiple pathways that I spoke to earlier. We need these services that are specific. And it's not just having one trans aware nurse on your unit. It's like, what are we doing to ensure that folks who are accessing our units or our services have supportive pathways that are continuous, not when this one specific trans or queer aware nurse is working, because we know that that nurse may not always be available and we can't just depend on them all the time. Call for healthcare professionals and communities to recognize not only the need for, but to actively help people build an arsenal for effective self-preservation interventions. So that's the last piece that I'll speak to this, but it's just, how are we working with healthcare professionals and the community for people to build tools to challenge the systems, to challenge the binary, and ensure they have a safe daily life, but also a safe birthing experience. So review and reflection. Decolonization. Whose job is this? Everyone's. Challenging the binary. Whose job is this? Everyone's. Birthing. The end of the day goal. The end of the day goal is that the folks who are giving birth to children are feeling that the experience is empowering and foundational to supporting a healthy relationship with the newborn. That is the number one piece, is that we are supporting folks to have babies so that maybe they would like to have more, but also that we're establishing a foundation so that after the birth, which, you know, sometimes they can be traumatic, sometimes they can be extreme, there's emergency situations that happen within birthing, but what are we doing to ensure that there's foundational support for that this new parent can connect to their newborn after? If we have an entire situation throughout the whole birthing where they are being misgendered and stigmatized and forced into a box, we are setting them up to create separations through relationships with their newborns, or even the first couple hours in that setting. If they're so uncomfortable, how, regardless of the beautiful love, we're not supporting that foundation for them to connect with their folks or with their baby or with their babies in that situation. So it's, how are we setting the tone in that room and creating that space so that not only the new parent makes for being a parent again or having more children, but also they're creating that relationship with and the foundations to support and create that connection with their newborn. And I think we don't speak to that enough. In healthcare, I've worked postpartum in NICU for a number of years, and I think as healthcare professionals, we really don't attribute the power or the connection that we have for people having more children, for folks who may have more children or not. Through that one bad connection, that one poor comment, that can determine if somebody has more children. And that is such a huge responsibility for folks. And we need to stress that more, because if you have a negative interaction with your patient or with that new parent, it may determine whether they have more children. And that is huge, 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 huge. And like, I was never told that throughout my entire career. And that understanding only came from experiencing interactions with patients who had horrible experiences with nurses or assumption experiences with nurses. A perfect example is in the NICU, we do get a number of same-sex couples that come internationally, because France and other countries, it's illegal to have surrogacy. So folks do come to Canada and to BC specifically, in Kamloops and in Vancouver to go through the process of surrogacy. And the experiences that folks come in and the assumptions that are made, it determines whether they're going to go through the process again or have more children, or for the surrogate themselves. It's an interesting conversation, and one that we as healthcare providers or folks who connect to the birthing process really need to understand, that we have so much responsibility and such a big role that we can affect someone's choice of having more children, as well as laying that foundation for folks connecting with their children. So that's my full presentation. I covered many topics, and I really wanted to make sure I dove into the Two-Spirit histories, because of the concept becoming more and more common to be spoken about, as well as the connections with healthcare. So we do have still about another 20 minutes or 25 minutes. So I would love to have some open discussions, or if there's any questions or comments that came up. I can see that there's a number of things in the chat, but I haven't been able to see them. So I don't know, Nikki or Nicole, if there's any folks or questions that people would like to talk about.
Hi. Thank you, Jessy, for that wonderful presentation. I just wanted to say Snatalia for for putting all your hard work into that. As you were speaking, I was thinking of my own responsibility, and I forgot to mention in my introduction, because I was so nervous, where I come from. So I'm Dakethan Wet'suwet'en, and maternally I'm raised through the clan, and my clan is the Lexiliu clan. And as soon as I was, little, from 5 into the age I am now, I have been trained to be of service. And this clan work influences my everyday work wherever I go, and the responsibility I have to be kind, to provide service to others. And so, when I started with Aboriginal health, I did my first webinar, and the talk was to be of service, and what our responsibility as healthcare providers really is. And it's not always about what's in the box, it's about what can you do for the person. So I teach my daughters the same concept in like how we serve, 100 people, a bowl of soup, and we say thank you and acknowledge every single person by eye. And it doesn't matter how exhausting it is, we're just going to keep doing it because it makes a difference. Even though I had done it 50 times before, we're going to continue to do it. And also I wanted to highlight, like, being of service goes a little beyond our, our title, and not always just staying within the rules. And a lot of folks in healthcare are aware of where these issues are when we have problems, especially when we're dealing with Indigenous folks, and we're talking about the report.
In plain sight.
In plain sight. Everybody was kind of aware of those issues. And so, what I like to do is to challenge healthcare professionals to be more of service, and really follow that guide that you have inside. We all know what's right and wrong. We all know what it feels wrong. And it's sometimes you have to go beyond the job. And so that's just being kind to whoever you're working with in whatever situation. So I don't know, that's just kind of what it reminds me of. My aunties have taught me to be this person, and I carry this on every day in my work, and I teach my daughters, and people see that reflected in my girls, because they are raising, my job is to raise a kind human being. And so to make these experiences better for, birthers, especially just learning the language, like, thank you for really stressing the importance of pronouns. I changed mine during your presentation, and it does mean a lot for a lot of people, and it starts with me. So today, to be of service, I'm going to do that. And I challenge anybody else in healthcare to do that, because it really starts with us. So Natalia, for your wonderful presentation, and just, that's just sitting with me. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you, truly. And that's the hope and the dream of this presentation, is exactly what you just said. So I appreciate that reflection and that internal work, and then how we spread it. Because like I said, the hope and the dream obviously is to jump to the end and take this whole system down, or a lot of this system, the super problematic things. And as much as I really wish that we could just jump there, we can't. And we have to work internally, independently, to then put pressure. So through these conversations now, Nikki, Nicole, we're going to go keep moving forward, and whoever else wants to join us, right, doing that internal work, and then pushing it, like exploring it to others, and giving that space back to others to have these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely, Jessy. I would like to invite everyone now. We're moving into like the bigger roundtable discussion part. If you want to turn on your camera, that'd be great. And if you're speaking, you can unmute yourself. Or we can just, type in the chat too. There's a bunch of things in the chat already, a few comments. Lots of people are giving you kudos, Jessy. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. And again, like, I think it's really important also with any type of presentation like this, is also paying respect to what has been shared with me. So the Two-Spirit presentation was shared with me by Harlan Pruden. Some of these teachings came from Elder Carol from Métis, who's a Métis elder in Merritt, BC, and a number of other matriarchs and powerhouses and powerful women who identify as women within my life who have supported me and my journey to get to where I am and to be able to share this education with folks. I think a big understanding in these conversations and in presentations that we go to is that we don't own education. And just because we hear something doesn't automatically mean that it's ours. So I am here today in a place of sharing this education with you and having these conversations so that folks can bring this forward. But that's not to say that any other presentation that we just get to take and walk away with, right? So I think it's important to pay tribute to where this education came from, that it was gifted to me, and then now I'm gifting it to you to continue the process of reflection and sharing, because Western society believes in ownership of education, and I do not. Trust me, it was a mind-boggling realization for me that we don't own these pieces and that we shouldn't just repeat something because we heard it. We should be having conversations about if we are able to repeat it and what teachings we're able to share. Thank you. I don't know if anybody has any other questions or comments. I don't know, Nikki, if there's anything in the chat that you want to read.
There's a few things. So Stephanie was saying, thank you for your heartfelt lecture. A subject that comes to mind during this, I'm assuming it says during change management and the use of language. Have you come across this? Maybe Stephanie, you could clarify a little more because I'm not sure.
Yes, sorry. And
okay.
there's a few words that were cut off or not entered. So sorry about that. My question was, something that comes to mind is I think about when we are looking at system changes, like the use of language. Have you come across change management? Can you speak to that at all?
Like to the specific term, change management?
Yeah, where there are sort of structures in place to support big language changes.
I mean, to be honest, I haven't come across that many, or necessarily the concept of change management, maybe in this degree, but like the understanding as we continue on these conversations, I think it was Nicole or somebody who spoke earlier, is like when we continuously want to change or push for this, and then we're met with these policies that are like, actually, this is the way it is, and it's way harder to change than it should be. It's interesting to see how difficult it can be to change one identifier or add something in there, especially in 2021. You know, like when we have this much access to resources and to services and to systems that should be able to be adapted. And if we aren't, when are we going to be pushing for a system that is adaptable? I know many of us have probably come in contact with electronic charting and the systems that are at place now within many of our health authorities. And it's like some of those processes and some of those pieces, why are we not changing or adapting to ensure that we're including all folks? So I don't know specifically the concept of change management, but I think it's within that self-explanatory that like there are no clear structures currently, which is I tried to speak to earlier, that like really support the process of these conversations. There's pieces that different associations put out, but our health authority has remained somewhat silent, or our health authorities have remained somewhat silent in these conversations, which is problematic.
So I think that is what I mean, is that how do we get everyone on the same page? That's essentially what that's what change management is. It is, I feel like you're speaking to for the most part to individual practitioners about how we can approach it, but what about on a system level?
So that's the thing, that's what so by you changing, the system will change. So by you taking this on and this understanding and utilizing terms, using your pronouns, identifying yourself, and doing that in front of your patients and your people, this will become an expectation of folks who are accessing our services. And if healthcare professionals don't pick up on it, like we're gonna get left behind. I'm sorry. I just did a presentation with some like 13, 14-year-old folks who destroyed me in the best way possible. And if we don't keep moving, we're going to be left behind, which some of us need to be left behind, sorry to say, but other folks, like we need to step it up because our system is outdated on a good day, let alone on a bad day. So in order to change, in my opinion, there is no such thing as full system change. And we use those words to build hope. There's individual change that leads to system change. So taking some of these teachings on that I shared with today, utilizing them in our practice, again, putting them in our emails, putting them on our names on here, speaking and introducing ourselves that way, it really will start the pressure. Making it mandatory within our practices or within our units. Hey everybody, let's add pronouns to our things. Let's add pronouns. Our union within nursing just put out pronoun pins finally after years of advocacy. And we can use these pieces and tools to normalize this. And we start with pronouns today. In a week, like, you know, we continue to build up and up and up. And unfortunately, that's the only real way, but also creating spaces like Miranda, Nicole, and Nikki created today, where we can have these conversations, and hopefully some folks are on the call that have maybe a little bit more, I don't like using the word power, but power to implement some of these pieces on a more unit-based or practice-based level.
Yeah, I think like making these type of webinars mandatory too, because like all of us who are on here, I assume are allies, part of the queer community, part of the Indigenous community, or at the very least actively working towards decolonizing or allyship. Whereas people who maybe are a bit, lack of a better word, like just aren't aware, are probably also not on the call. So yeah,
I completely agree. And I think that's the thing, is like we need to have more conversations with our colleges and our associations, and how do we, or within our units. I mean, our health authorities have tried really hard with our training modules, and we've been able to create specific training modules and Sonia's and a number of different training pieces that are considered mandatory. A, are they actually mandatory? And what does that mean? And B, it's like, what are we doing to ensure that these folks are staying up to date? It's not just a one-time tick box. It's not just a one presentation. It's a continuous presentation, because my presentation today may be very different in a couple months as we continue to grow and expand. So the practice needs to change, right? So I agree, Nicole, like these conversations need to be happening all throughout. And it's it again comes down to time and money, which is the biggest issue, right? Like in our society and capitalism and all these pieces, it's time and money. And it's so sad that is it, but that is the base root of all of it, is time and money.
Yeah, it is sad. And sorry. And just like, please. With the concept you were talking about, like being connected with or to, like when people are aware that it's time and money based, there's the two. And I had a question earlier in the chat of like, what's an example of that? Like as a patient, I know when I'm connecting with a healthcare provider versus to healthcare. And as a practitioner, I think I know when I may be connecting with someone, but I don't know if I actually know. And
I think our soul, like our internal gut tells us, like I feel like I've definitely been, and like it's also presenting ourselves, like I know that in situations in the NICU where it's super heightened, I identify myself, like I use my pronouns and identify as Métis, and I identify within certain realms to ensure that I'm connecting with a patient to try and make the foundational safe for folks, because they come in and it's not safe, or folks come in and they don't feel comfortable, and it's trying to set the stage that I'm not better or more or anything. We're equals in this setting. You are the parents, I am the nurse, and we are, if not even equals, because you're the parents. You say when you hold your baby, you say when you want these things. But our system doesn't support that mentality for a lot of nurses, right? Because we get caught in our Western sciences, which of course, if the baby's unsafe, then that's a different thing. If there's risks and complications, of course, we can't just pull out a tube. But you're the parent, you're the person in charge in these situations. So making sure my patients, or the folks, I don't even like saying my patients, but the folks who are accessing services that I work within, they feel that I am there for them, not you are there for me. So that is where I feel like I can connect with somebody, is like there's an understanding that they have the power. This is their baby. This situation, this birthing is theirs, not me in my hospital room and all my supplies. This is yours. And then you get to make the decisions. And again, emergency situations aside, of course, because we all know birthing is amazingly, beautifully intense.
Okay, unmuting. Yeah, I just wanted to chime in a little bit about the mandatory piece of training, because it's such an important discussion that happens within equity, diversity, and inclusion at large. Is like we often kind of feel like everyone on the call is already on board, right? We're halfway there, but it's a lot of other folks that really need training that would never sign up for something like this. And
which is what I love about coming to these things, because then we all get to talk together. Like,
right?
it's a very beautiful, like, yeah. But then I also
Right.
understand the like obviously the other piece of it. Sorry, Nikki.
No, it's totally okay. Like I think part of like the best practice, I guess, within DEI is not to make training mandatory, because somebody who's done this for a long time is people often will show up very angry and resentful and refuse to engage or learn anything. And so rather than insisting and making it mandatory, having it built into the fabric of every aspect of the way we bring people on board and we engage our teams, and that starts with our leadership, right? So directors and leaders, elders, matriarchs, nurse in charge, all those folks are the ones that would say, you know, I learned this great course, you know, and also building it into things like when we have team meetings and performance evaluations, and saying, this is something that we're all expected to learn. How are you doing on this step in terms of that progress? I just wanted to jump that in there.
And I totally agree. And I think, again, it comes back to folks who necessarily aren't here. Again, time and money. Yeah. Again, like Nikki said, it needs to be woven in. It can't be like an evening. I'm hoping that most of the folks on this call, which I would assume maybe not, this is probably your own time or your own break or your own lunch break or something, right? Like not necessarily a lot, or maybe some of the folks isn't. I really hope that this is paid time as well as supportive time, because we see allyship is a side of the desk thing. Our system doesn't support us to develop these relationships. So I think this is my first time within my role at CBRC as a Two-Spirit program manager. I've been doing Two-Spirit work for 20 years, and I've never had a role where this is what I get to do. And it's the first of its kind. Like this is not a thing. And because it comes down to time and money and outputs, and like this is not a fast, quick thing that we can account for. It's not a fast, quick decision like piece. So it's like, how do we create environments and weave all this beautifulness together so that folks are feeling, even if they have questions or different things, feeling safe enough to come and to take part. And it's not their own time, their own money, these own pieces. Because again, we're all burnt out. Like this, COVID has brought it to light in so many other ways. Yeah. That was a system that we already know. I mean, Heather and I have a beautiful long relationship. We went to nursing school together, and I mean, we were very active nursing students involved in associations and did hours and hours of work. Like Heather had 2 young girls, these beautiful little now teenagers that I just saw on Facebook that I can't even believe. And we were there Monday to Friday evenings, traveling the country, advocating for folks on our own time, on our own student dollars. And if it wasn't for those experiences, I wouldn't be here today. If it wasn't for meeting and connecting with other leaders like Heather and other nursing students, I wouldn't be an advocate where I am today. If it wasn't for those relationships that I built outside of nursing school and sacrificed my own time, my own relationships, it changed me. And our systems don't support that type of leadership and professional development, which is, again, the problem. Like I hands down know I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for my connections within Canadian Nursing Students Association and the real leadership I saw there. Because the quick thing, time and money, you're elected, you have a year and you get what you can do in a year. Whereas our other leadership, it's a very different structure. So I saw things go out and produce policies and change. Like that's what I expected when I came into my profession. Sadly, very sadly, not the case. Like the changes that that Canadian Nursing Students Association put out in the 3 years that I was involved are not even comparable to the changes the slowness of what's happening now. Change is coming, but it's different. Side note.
I've just got a comment here, Jessy, in the chat. I've also, by the way, in case people haven't been following the chat, Nicole and I are really curious to know where everybody's from, where you work and what your roles are. If you want to type them into the chat, we'd be so appreciative. But Jen has commented here that it would be good to have case studies with this language use. So Jessy, you comfortably use words like folks and people. Examples of acceptable vocabulary can be used in conversations in the birthing session. And yeah, I don't think we have Lauren Goldman on the call today. I didn't see her, but she's the nurse nursing educator over at Transcare BC, and she's created a really wonderful set of terminology, which I can share later on the Eventbrite with folks. We'll email out a thank you with maybe we'll get your slides, Jessy, if you're willing to share them, and a few other things. And I'll include the terminology fact sheet on there, because it's a lot of really gender neutral and gender affirming language. Parker Hughes on the call, you maybe have some stuff too. Yeah, if you want to, do you want to say anything, Parker? Or am I putting you on the spot?
Hey, I'm Parker. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yep. I'm the program coordinator for PRISM Services, which is an education, information, and referral program for trans, two-spirit, and non-binary folks within VCH. So I'll pop our email in the chat box, and I can send along any resources to Nikki and Nicole.
Thanks so much, Parker. Yeah, so we can share a few things out if that's helpful for folks. Jessy, you probably have a lot of great stuff too.
Yeah, but I mean, I utilize both of those. So I think I should have said earlier, when I really stressed the importance of pronouns too, is having resources that Parker and other folks have put out, so that when folks challenge you or they question why or what, you have the resources or the language to bring in those pieces, because that's also important. I understand that I can argue, I can bring in the experiences that I have to use my pronouns and justify very clearly, not even need to justify, but clarify why this is so important. But other folks haven't experienced that. So these tools are extremely important as to why and why this is absolutely necessary. So that would be, I should have mentioned that earlier. And if you please, yeah, those would be great to send out. And I think it's just really important for us to continuously reflect on the services and how these services are implemented in practice. So, I mean, we have great organizations like Transcare, like groups that are doing the work, but are never given the light, right? Like a lot of times it's like, okay, we'll just take these and go. But why aren't we have organizations and groups and Transcare? Like, it's a perfect example. PRISM is a perfect example of folks that are there, but given a single spot or given a part-time employee, like, you know, the funding and the structures are not there to follow through or even in. I mean, I preach about this too. Sexual health is a perfect example. Sexual health is a side topic, even though we all experience it. And I'm not just talking about penetrative sex, I'm talking about sex within the realm. It is never a topic that is priority. There's no positions or jobs that are focused around supporting folks within the spectrum of sex. It's tacked on to a lot of things, but it's not something that we prioritize in current day, which is, as we know, super harmful. So how can we change that? How can we adapt that? Tangent.
Wow. So there's a few things. We're getting close to the last 5 minutes. And so there was a few things as we start to wrapping up, somebody's asked, how will we be able to access and share this recording? We are going to host it on our VCH internal site, but we'll also see if we can post it on our VCH YouTube channel. And I'll send the link out when we send out the email to everybody. And I wonder too, as we wrap up, I was going to show folks how to change their pronouns. So if you don't know how to do it, we'll do it really quick. So when you go down to your toolbar, you should see a list of participants and click on your name. And on the right side, there's a blue box that says more. You click on that and you rename yourself. That's how you do it when you're in a Zoom. If you want to have it changed all the time, go into your Zoom profile on the Zoom website, the Zoom portal, and enter your pronouns where your first name is or your last name, and it'll show on there all the time in every Zoom that you're at.
Thank you so much, Jessy. I'm just so honored that you shared your time and your wisdom and your lifetime or many lifetimes of wisdom and experience with us here today. And I want to thank everyone who joined in. I think, you know, it's really clear that when it comes to two-spirit and non-binary leadership, that's not coming from the healthcare system. The healthcare system isn't set up really to lead that work right now. Jessy, you mentioned midwives are kind of dabbling in this, coming to terms with this.
The only folks.
Yeah, and largely the system, you know, hasn't taken that step to really grapple with this. So the leadership is coming from folks like you, Jessy, folks in community, in the time that I was, engaged in birth work as a doula, I felt like I was learning from my community around me, the birth worker community, and from the families that I serve. And I think it's always important for us who work within the healthcare system to understand that the expertise comes from the families, comes from the babies, comes from the community. And we need to not always think of ourselves as the experts, but look to the folks that we serve for the expertise that they have, and that this is part of that that we're learning with and alongside the families that we serve. And I also just wanted to close off by really acknowledging that this space that we're holding together is a systems intervention. It might feel like it's just a 1-hour webinar, but actually what we're doing is revolutionary. Totally. We're holding space for Indigenous people and non-Indigenous allies to sit together and learn from each other. So this is a really powerful systems transformation. And I thank all of you for participating today. It might feel like it's just a drop of water in an ocean, but we're creating ripples, and we are going to change the system. So thank you all.
And thank you, Miranda, for creating or giving back this space and like advocating for this space, truly.
All right,
thanks everyone.
Time has come. I just wanted to say Sanchalia again, warmest heart wishes, really grateful for your work, Jessy. Thank you for everybody in your attendance, and keep following us for the following emails that we will be sending shortly after.
Thank you. Jinkuya.
Hi. Hi. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Take care. We'll just stay on, Jessy. I think everybody's slowly going.
No problem. I'm just going to cough.
Yeah.